Billionaire finds fainting. Boy and 3 abandoned babies. What he did next shocked the world.
It was supposed to be just another cold Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the wind cuts deep, and even the birds refuse to sing. Billionaire tech mogul Richard Hayes wasn't the kind of man to stroll through public parks, but today something made him take the long route to his office. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe he just wanted silence, or maybe something was calling him there. As he walked through Central Green Park in downtown Chicago, his phone buzzed with messages, but he ignored them. Something wasn't right. The usual chatter of morning joggers and laughing children was missing. The park was too quiet, eerily quiet. Then he saw it. Near the base of an old oak tree, in the farthest corner of the park, a boy lay motionless. He looked about 12, maybe 13. His skinny arms were wrapped around 3 tiny infants' babies, all bundled in what looked like torn towels. Richard's heart skipped. He ran over, his polished Italian shoes crunching over fallen leaves. The boy's face was pale, lips cracked, eyes barely open. One of the babies whimpered softly, just enough to prove they were still alive. Hey, hey! Richard knelt down, shaking the boy gently. Are you okay? Can you hear me? The boy's eyes fluttered. Don't take them away, he whispered, then fainted. Richard pulled off his designer coat and wrapped it around them all. This wasn't just a random homeless situation. There was something deeper here, something painful. And Richard Hayes, the man who built billion-dollar empires from code and courage, was about to face the most human test of all. What do you do when fate drops for lives into your lap? Because this wasn't charity. This was destiny, and it had only just begun.
The ambulance screamed down the street, red lights flashing as it weaved through traffic. Richard sat stiffly in the back, his arms still cradling the boy and the babies, refusing to let them go. A paramedic tried to ease the newborns from his grip, but he shook his head firmly. "They're not just patients," Richard muttered. "They're his whole world." The boy was unconscious, lying on a stretcher beside him, a thin oxygen mask on his face. The 3 babies had been wrapped in thermal blankets, their tiny bodies showing signs of dehydration and cold exposure. One had a rash on her cheek. Another wouldn't stop trembling. But they were alive. Barely. At the hospital, chaos ensued. Nurses shouted orders, doctors rushed with IV drips, and stretchers rolled down sterile hallways. But Richard stood in the center of it all like a statue, his tailored suit soaked, hair ruffled, eyes focused only on the boy. Everything else faded into a blur. "Sir," a doctor finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "You should come with me. We need to talk." Richard followed her into a quiet room. He sat silent as she reviewed a clipboard. "The boy, his vitals are stabilizing. He's severely malnourished. We suspect he hasn't had a proper meal in days. The infants are likely not his biological siblings. We'll need DNA to be sure. But here's the bigger issue. He had no ID, no records, no school enrollment. He doesn't exist." Richard blinked. "What do you mean?" The doctor hesitated. "I mean, according to our system, that boy was never born. No hospital records, no address, no family." Richard leaned back, stunned. "So, he's a ghost?" "In a way," she nodded. "A child like this doesn't just fall through the cracks, he was thrown." Later that evening, Richard stood outside the hospital room, watching through the glass. The boy was awake now, though barely. A nurse fed one of the babies formula while the other 2 slept in warm bassinets nearby. The boy's eyes never left them. His arms twitched every time someone got too close. A protective instinct. Richard couldn't take it anymore. He opened the door and stepped in. The boy flinched. "I'm not here to hurt you," Richard said softly. "I found you in the park. Do you remember?" The boy nodded faintly. "What's your name?" Silence. Then a whisper. "Ben." Richard smiled gently. "Ben, that's a strong name." Ben didn't respond. His eyes dropped to the babies again. "Are they your siblings?" Ben shook his head. "No." "Whose are they?" "They were in the shelter," Ben whispered, barely audible. "The woman who watched us, she left. Didn't come back." "Shelter?" Richard leaned forward. "What shelter?" Ben swallowed hard. Abandoned place on West Avenue. Not legal, just a house. Lots of us. Richard's heart clenched. A part of the city he had overlooked. Forgotten kids. Forgotten stories. Why didn't you run away sooner? Ben's eyes glistened. I tried, but I couldn't leave them. Someone had to keep them warm. A lump rose in Richard's throat. A boy barely 13, more father than child. You did good, Ben. You kept them alive. Ben looked up. Are you taking them away? Richard paused. The truth was, he didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain. No child would be sent back into the cold, not on his watch. No, Ben, he said finally. I'm staying, and so are they. You're safe now. The boy closed his eyes, and for the first time since they met, he relaxed. But Richard knew this was just the beginning. Because somewhere in the shadows of the city, someone had let this happen. Someone had built a secret world of silence and neglect, and now it was up to Richard, billionaire, tech genius, and suddenly accidental guardian, to uncover the truth. What kind of city buries its children? And what kind of man lets it? The next morning, Richard Hayes didn't go to work. He canceled 3 investor calls, postponed a product launch, and handed over his daily schedule to his assistant with a simple message. I have something more important to do. Wearing jeans and a hoodie for the first time in years, he walked out of the hospital and got into an unmarked SUV. Ben's words from the night before still echoed in his ears. West Avenue, a house not legal. Richard had seen the worst of boardrooms, survived business betrayals, and clawed through every Shark Tank in Silicon Valley. But what he was about to face was something completely different. When he arrived at West Avenue, it was clear this part of the city had been forgotten. The roads were cracked, trash bins overflowed, stray dogs roamed freely, no playgrounds, no signs of care, just rows of old broken buildings with shattered windows and faded paint. Then he saw it. A 2-story gray house at the end of the block, windows boarded up, but faint noises coming from inside. The door wasn't locked, it just creaked open. He stepped in. The stench hit first. Urine, mildew, and something far worse. Inside, the walls were stained. Mattresses lay on the floor, some without sheets. A baby bottle rolled under a broken table. A girl no older than 6 sat in the corner, holding a dirty doll, her eyes hollow and distant. Richard's stomach turned. A teenage boy, maybe 15, stepped forward. He was wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too small and clutched a rusted metal pipe. His eyes were fierce, ready to fight. You lost? The teen growled. Richard raised his hands. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm looking for information. Cops? No, just someone who found a boy and 3 babies from this house. His name is Ben. The teen's eyes flickered, then narrowed. Ben left 2 nights ago. Thought he was better than us. Always trying to feed the babies first. Always asking where Miss Carla went. Miss Carla? Richard asked. The boy nodded. She ran this place. Said she was taking care of kids, but she only showed up for money. Government checks, I think. One day she left and never came back. Richard took a slow breath. This wasn't just some random woman with a good heart who got overwhelmed. This was fraud, neglect, abuse. How many kids were here? The boy shrugged. Used to be 20. Some got picked up by strangers. Some ran off. Some didn't make it. Richard's heart broke a little more. He crouched down, looked at the 6-year-old girl still hugging her doll. What's your name? He asked. She didn't answer, just rocked back and forth. The teen stepped in. That's Emmy. She doesn't talk much. Screams at night, though. Richard stood up. Do you have a phone? The teen laughed bitterly. You think we can afford phones? He pulled out his own and made a call. It's Richard. I need CPS, police, and a medical team at 1218 West Avenue, now, and bring food, blankets, and backup. Less than an hour later, the house was surrounded. Ambulances, police tape, social workers, reporters. Richard stood back watching as children were carefully led out of the house one by one. Some cried, some just stared, most were silent. Ben had come from this, and there were more Bens out there. That night, Richard returned to the hospital, carrying a warm teddy bear under one arm and a bag of soft baby clothes in the other. He stepped into the room quietly. Ben was awake, feeding one of the babies with shaky hands. "You came back," Ben said, surprised. "I said I would. Did you find them?" "I did," Richard nodded. "The house is shut down. The other kids are safe now. Some are going to real homes. Some will need time." Ben looked down. "I wanted to go back for them. I couldn't carry everyone." "You did more than anyone else ever did," Richard replied gently. "You survived. You saved lives. That matters." Ben swallowed. "What happens now?" Richard sat beside him. "Now? We build something better. For you, for them, for every child they forgot." Ben blinked. "Why do you care?" Richard smiled, a little sad. "Because once, a long time ago, someone forgot me too." The boy said nothing, but for the first time he smiled. Not wide, not loud, just enough. And that small, quiet smile was enough to light a fire in Richard's heart. The fight had begun. 3 days passed. Ben remained in the hospital under careful observation, but his eyes were brighter now. He spoke more, mostly about the babies, what they liked, what scared them, and how he used to hum to them when they cried. He still refused to sleep unless they were near. The hospital room had become their world. Richard visited every day, bringing toys, books, fresh clothes, and hot meals. He sat on the floor beside Ben, listened, and asked questions gently. No pressure, no pity, just presence. On the 4th day, Richard asked a new question. "Do the babies have names?" Ben nodded slowly. "I gave them some. I didn't know what else to call them." He pointed to the smallest baby, the one who barely made a sound. "That's Hope. She always held on even when she got sick." He pointed to the one with the loudest cry. "That's Max. He cries the most, but he's the strongest." Then he gently touched the head of the third, the one with soft curls and a quiet stare. "That's Sky. She looks at the sky a lot like she's waiting for something." Richard felt his throat tighten. Those names weren't random. They were Ben's hope, his way of making them real, even when the world refused to see them. "They're beautiful names," Richard said. "And what about you? Is your name really Ben?" The boy hesitated. "It's what I remember. I think it's what Carla used to call me. But I don't remember much before her." "No last name?" Ben shook his head. Richard nodded slowly. He understood. Sometimes names are stolen from you before you're old enough to claim them. But now things were about to change. Later that evening, Richard sat in his penthouse staring at his computer screen. Reports flooded in from his lawyers, private investigators, and child welfare agencies. The abandoned house on West Avenue was part of a much bigger operation. Illegal fostering scams, forged paperwork, and government funds collected under fake names. Miss Carla, whose real name was Carla Jennings, had disappeared without a trace. But Richard wasn't giving up. He called in favors from the FBI and even arranged a meeting with the mayor. This wasn't just about Ben anymore. This was a war against a system that failed its children. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Ben and the babies had started gaining weight. Nurses smiled more when they entered the room. Even Sky laughed once, just once, but it echoed in Ben's heart like music. That night, Richard returned with something in his hand, a piece of paper. He handed it to Ben. "What's this?" the boy asked. "It's paperwork. I'm applying to become your legal guardian." Ben blinked. "Me and the babies?" Richard smiled. "If you'll let me." The boy stared at the form, his hands shaking. "Why?" Richard took a deep breath. "Because I was like you once. I didn't grow up with love. I grew up with money, cold homes, and people who cared about what I could do, not who I—" Ben's voice cracked. "But I'm not smart. I'm not special." "You're more than special," Richard said firmly. "You're brave. You're kind. You kept 3 babies alive when most adults would have given up." Ben's eyes filled with tears. Do we get to stay together?" "If you say yes, then forever." Ben nodded slowly. Then he looked at the babies and whispered, "We've never had forever before." Richard knelt down, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then let's make one. The next morning, the hospital staff gathered to watch something rare. A billionaire in jeans and sneakers, pushing a stroller with 3 babies, Hope, Max, and Sky, and holding the hand of a boy with no last name, no past, and now, a future. When the receptionist smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," Ben looked up and whispered, "Do I have to call you that too?" Richard grinned. "Only if you want to." Ben smiled shyly. "Can I call you Rich?" Richard paused. "You can call me whatever feels safe." Ben thought for a moment, then said softly, "Then I'll just call you Home." And Richard's heart broke in the most beautiful way. Because in that moment, he knew he hadn't saved a boy. The boy had saved him. The following morning, the world woke up to a photo that quickly went viral. A billionaire pushing a baby stroller with 3 infants, holding the hand of a fragile-looking boy with big, watchful eyes. The caption read, "Tech mogul Richard Hayes adopts homeless boy and 3 abandoned babies. A new chapter begins." But the headlines lied. Richard hadn't adopted anyone, yet. The legal process was long, with home inspections, psychological evaluations, and background checks. And Ben wasn't just a homeless boy. He was a child who had survived things no child ever should. He didn't trust easily. He flinched at sudden movements, and he still slept with his shoes on in case he had to run again. But the world didn't care about those details. The world wanted a fairy tale. Richard, on the other hand, wanted the truth. He hired a trauma therapist named Karen to work with Ben and the babies. She was warm, soft-spoken, and never pushed too hard. The first time she visited, Ben stayed quiet the entire session. But by the second week, he started talking. About the nights in the shelter when the power went out. About the crying that never stopped. About the fear of being taken by strangers who paid more. One afternoon, Karen asked gently, "What do you want most, Ben?" Ben didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I want the crying to stop. Not just the babies, but mine too." At night, Richard sat at his desk going through more files, background checks, financial forms, court documents. He was building something new, a foundation for abandoned and undocumented children, named the Sky Project, after the little girl who always looked up. He visited the mayor again. He lobbied for a change in child protection policies. He called senators. But despite his money, the system moved slow. And one evening, it pushed back. A woman from Child Protective Services, Ms. Langley, paid a surprise visit. She wore a dark gray suit and had a clipboard that seemed heavier than her expression. "We have concerns," she said bluntly. Richard narrowed his eyes. "Concerns? You're a single man. No prior experience with children. And you've suddenly involved yourself in a high-risk case involving 4 minors, one of whom has no birth records." "I'm offering them a home," Richard replied. "You're offering headlines," she countered. Ben stood at the top of the stairs, holding Hope in his arms. He didn't say a word, just listened. Ms. Langley continued, "Until a full investigation is completed, the children will remain under temporary state custody." Richard froze. "You want to remove them from my home?" "It's procedure." "No, it's punishment," Richard snapped. "For what? Caring too much?" Ben began descending the stairs, slow and quiet, eyes wide with fear. "They're not taking us, right?" Richard turned quickly. "No one is taking anyone, not without a fight." But it was too late. 2 uniformed social workers stepped in through the front door, paperwork in hand. The babies were taken first. Ben tried to hold on to Max, but a worker gently pried his fingers away. Hope started crying. Sky whimpered. Ben's chest rose and fell in rapid panic. "Please, please don't let them go!" Richard looked into the boy's eyes and felt his heart shatter. "I promise you," Richard said, grabbing his coat, "I will get them back." And just like that, the home that had started to feel warm felt cold again. That night, Ben didn't cry. He just sat in silence, staring out the window, holding the teddy bear Richard gave him on day 2. "Why did they take them?" he finally whispered. Richard sat beside him. "Because the world is slow to believe in love it can't explain." Ben nodded. "But you'll fight for us?" Richard clenched his fists. "To the end." And he meant it. Because this wasn't just about custody. It was about justice. 3 days. That's how long it took for Richard Hayes to rally an army. He had money. He had power. But more importantly, he had something to fight for now. Ben, Hope, Max, and Sky. While Ben sat at home in silence, barely touching his food, Richard launched a full-scale legal war. He hired the best child welfare attorney in the country, Angela Morton, a sharp, fearless woman who once sued an entire state on behalf of orphaned children, and won. "We're not just fighting a removal order," Angela told Richard in his office. "We're fighting a system that doesn't believe a billionaire can love a child he didn't create." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then we'll show them what love really looks like." Meanwhile, Ben wasn't doing well. He refused therapy. He stopped smiling. Every night, he waited by the front door as if the babies might crawl their way back home. Richard tried everything, movies, ice cream, even a trip to the planetarium, but Ben remained locked in a world of guilt and grief. "I was supposed to protect them," he said once. "They trusted me. I failed." "You didn't fail," Richard told him. "The system did." Ben didn't reply. He just looked away, hugging his knees tighter. One afternoon, Richard handed him a sealed envelope. "It's from Sky's new foster family. They wanted you to see this." Ben opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing, 3 stick-figure babies under a rainbow. Next to them, a bigger stick figure with a crooked smile and wild hair labeled Ben. At the bottom, written in crayon, were the words, "I miss you." Tears welled in Ben's eyes. "She remembers me." "Of course she does," Richard said. "You were the only light in her world." That night, something changed. Ben sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and began writing letters to each baby. He told Hope to stay strong, to keep fighting. He told Max to keep crying because it meant he still had a voice. He told Sky to keep looking at the sky because she'd see him in every star. When Richard found the letters, he didn't say anything. He just folded them carefully and placed them in stamped envelopes. "Will you mail them?" Ben asked. "I already did." The next morning, they went to court. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, and tense. Ms. Langley sat across the aisle, her expression unreadable. The judge, a middle-aged man with silver glasses and a soft voice, looked down at the case file like it was heavier than the bench. Angela stood and began to speak. She showed the judge photos of the abandoned shelter, of Ben in the hospital, of the babies recovering. She read the judge the reports from pediatricians who had examined the children. She presented footage of Richard's visits, meals delivered to foster families, therapy receipts, and financial records of the new foundation he had created, the Sky Project, already supporting 22 children in similar situations. "Your Honor," Angela said finally, "Mr. Hayes did not rescue these children for publicity. He did it because no one else did, because they needed someone, because he cared, and because he's already built a home filled with more love than most of us ever see." The courtroom went still. The judge turned to Richard. "Do you have anything to say?" Richard stood slowly. He didn't speak like a CEO. He didn't pitch, sell, or impress. He simply said, "They saved me." That was all. After a long pause, the judge spoke. "I'll review the full custody request. Until then, the children will return to Mr. Hayes's care under temporary guardianship, effective immediately." Ben gasped. Richard's hands tightened at his sides to keep from crying. That afternoon, as the black SUV pulled up to the courthouse, the door opened, and 3 little bundles of joy were gently placed into Ben's arms. Hope giggled. Max squealed. Sky whispered, "Ben." The boy fell to his knees, hugging them all at once, tears falling freely down his cheeks. Richard knelt beside him. "You kept your promise," Ben said softly. "I always will," Richard replied. And this time, they weren't alone, because the fight had drawn attention. Not from tabloids, but from people who mattered, people who wanted to help, people who saw that family wasn't built by blood, but by love, survival, and choice. The mansion didn't feel so cold anymore. Once a fortress of glass and silence, it now echoed with laughter, the squeak of baby toys, and Ben's soft lullabies. The babies were back, each one healthier, fuller, more alive. Sky had taken to following Ben everywhere, clutching his pinky finger like it was her safety rope. Max was louder than ever, banging spoons against cereal bowls and screaming for attention. Hope, always the quiet one, had started smiling in her sleep. Richard often caught her curled up in a sunbeam on the living room rug, at peace. Ben had changed too. He still had nightmares sometimes, still checked the locks at night, still packed a small bag just in case. But he also laughed now, read books out loud, learned to use the coffee machine, even though he didn't like the taste. And one night, without warning, he asked Richard, "Do you think I'm a real big brother?" Richard looked up from the baby monitor and smiled. "I think you're the best big brother in the world." Ben didn't reply. He just stared down at Sky, asleep in his lap, and whispered, "Good." In the weeks that followed, Richard's foundation, the Sky Project, grew faster than expected. Volunteers flooded in. Donations poured from around the country. Celebrities posted about it. Schools partnered with the initiative. Abandoned houses were being turned into transitional homes for undocumented kids. And Richard, once a man obsessed with algorithms and shares, now spent his mornings reviewing blueprints for child-safe spaces. But with growth came challenges. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address, no signature. Just one sentence. "You took something that wasn't yours." Richard stared at the paper for a long time. Then he folded it, locked it in his desk drawer, and called security to upgrade all surveillance. But he didn't tell Ben. He didn't want fear to creep back into their world. Instead, he focused on something else, a surprise. Richard had started the paperwork to give Ben what he had never had, a real identity. It was a process that required state approval, court appearances, and even a therapist's report. But Richard was determined. He sat Ben down one night after dinner, handed him a folder. Ben opened it. Inside was a new birth certificate. At the top was a name in bold letters, Ben Hayes. Ben blinked. "Is this real?" "As real as your heartbeat," Richard said. Ben's hands trembled. "You gave me your last name?" Richard smiled. "You gave me a reason to carry it forward." Ben looked down at the name again, whispering it like it was magic. "Ben Hayes. Do you like it?" "I love it." There were no words after that. Just a quiet hug between a man who thought he'd lost his humanity and a boy who gave it back to him. That weekend, Richard took all 4 children to a quiet lake house outside the city. No phones, no staff, just them. They had a picnic under the sun, roasted marshmallows, and built sand castles. Max tried to eat sand. Hope fell asleep on a beach towel. Sky chased a butterfly for almost half an hour. "And Ben?" Ben laughed. Real belly-deep laughter. At one point, as the sun began to set, Ben looked up and said, "I don't want this to end." Richard pulled him close. "Then it won't." But the world had other plans. That night, back in the city, someone broke into the old shelter on West Avenue. Spray-painted across the rotting walls were 5 words. "They were never yours, thief." Richard's phone buzzed with an alert. He stared at the screen, eyes narrowing, because he knew now this wasn't over. Someone from Ben's past was watching, and they wanted the children back. The next morning, Richard didn't go to his meetings. He didn't check the stock market. He didn't even open his laptop. Instead, he stood in the nursery doorway, watching the babies sleep. Max's arm flopped over Hope. Sky curled like a cat in the corner of the crib. Ben sat nearby on a beanbag, reading a storybook softly to himself. Richard's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a security alert. It was Angela. "We found her," she said. "Carla?" "Yes. Hiding in a trailer park in Indiana under the name Lisa Kern. She applied for food stamps last week. We traced her fingerprints. She's the one." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. "Is she in custody?" "Not yet. I wanted to call you first. She knows you took the kids. She's the one leaving the notes." Richard exhaled slowly. "What does she want?" "Money, most likely, or control. People like Carla don't want justice. They want leverage." Richard glanced at Ben, still reading softly. He lowered his voice. "Then let's take away her power." Angela continued. The good news is, with this information, we can fast-track the adoption petition. The judge can now clearly see the danger of returning these kids to the system. Richard hung up, eyes still on Ben. Later that day, he asked the boy, "Do you remember Carla?" Ben hesitated, then nodded. "She smelled like cigarettes and always called me boy like I didn't have a name. She hit kids when they cried too much." Richard's stomach twisted. "She might try to find you." Ben didn't speak for a long moment. Then he looked up and said, "Let her try." The next 48 hours moved fast. With the police on standby, Richard's legal team filed an emergency petition for full custody and permanent adoption rights. Media outlets were silenced to keep the children safe. Security cameras were placed at every corner of the mansion. Guards hired, passwords changed, and emergency plans drawn. But Carla wasn't waiting. She moved first. 2 nights later, a security guard on the east gate caught a woman trying to sneak in through the back garden, wrapped in a dark coat, holding a stolen hospital badge and a fake ID. It was her. Carla. She didn't fight when they handcuffed her. She just smirked. "I just came to see my babies," she hissed. "These aren't your babies," the officer snapped. "They were mine before he came along. He bought them, just like everything else." At the station, she refused to speak to detectives, but she gave one chilling message to the officer who booked her. "Tell the billionaire that the system makes mistakes and someday they'll take them back from him." When Richard heard that, he didn't get angry. He got focused. He held a press conference the next morning, standing before cameras and microphones, not as a businessman, but as a father. "There are children in this country without names, without homes, and without love. And if the law can't protect them, I will. Let this case be the start of something bigger. We are not giving them back. We are building them forward." The crowd cheered. Reporters called it the speech of the year. Ben, watching from the mansion, turned to Karen, his therapist, and said, "He's really my dad now, huh?" Karen smiled. "He always was." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Chicago skyline, Richard stood on the mansion balcony, holding Sky in one arm and sipping lukewarm tea. Ben joined him, dragging a blanket behind him. "Can we be safe now?" Ben asked. "We're always safer when we face things together," Richard replied. "What if someone else comes?" "Then we fight again." Ben leaned against him. "Okay." In that quiet, nothing was broken anymore. Not the boy. Not the billionaire. Not the family. But far away, in a courtroom tucked behind security glass, Carla waited, with one more secret she hadn't told anyone yet. And it was a secret that could tear everything apart. 2 weeks after Carla's arrest, life had started to feel normal, at least a new kind of normal. Ben returned to his online classes. The babies were enrolled in a developmental daycare center within the mansion's grounds. Richard even went back to work for a few hours a day, though his team noticed something had changed. He still ran a billion-dollar tech empire, but his heart now lived in a nursery and in every whispered bedtime story. Then came the knock on the door. It was Angela. She held a thick envelope in her hands, her face pale and tight. "You need to sit down," she told Richard. "What is it?" "It's about Ben." Richard's chest tightened. "What about him?" Angela opened the file. "Carla has been talking. Not much, but enough. She gave us the names of 2 men, one dead, one in prison, who were part of the foster house system she ran. One of them confessed something shocking." She slid a document across the table. "Ben isn't undocumented. He was taken from a hospital, a real hospital, at birth." Richard froze. "You're saying—" "He was kidnapped. His birth name is Ethan Monroe. He was reported missing from Mercy General when he was just 5 days old." Richard stared at the paper. Ethan had real parents. Alive. Searching. Angela continued. "The Monroes live in Colorado, a middle-class couple. They reported the abduction 13 years ago. It made local headlines, but the case went cold." Silence. Then Richard stood, pacing. "What do we tell Ben?" Angela hesitated. "That's the next challenge. Because the Monroes, they want to meet him." Richard sat down again. "He's not ready. He's just now finding peace. This could destroy him." "I know. But we can't hide it either. Legally, we have to tell him. And the Monroes aren't demanding custody. They're just desperate to see their son. That evening, Richard sat in Ben's room. The boy was lying on the floor with Max asleep on his chest, Sky curled up beside him, and Hope sucking her thumb nearby. Richard took a breath. "Ben, I have something important to tell you." The boy looked up. "What is it?" "Do you remember how you said you don't remember much before the shelter?" Ben nodded slowly. "Well, we found something. Someone. Actually, two someones. A couple in Colorado. They're your birth parents." Silence. Richard watched the boy's face change, confusion, disbelief, then fear. "You mean I'm not Ben Hayes?" "You are. You always will be. But before Carla, your name was Ethan Monroe. You were taken from your parents when you were a baby." Ben stood up slowly. "And they're still looking for me?" "Yes." The room felt too quiet now. Ben looked down at the sleeping babies. "But I belong here." "You do," Richard said firmly. "And that's not changing. No one is taking you away. But I think you deserve to know where you came from. And maybe meet them." Ben's lip trembled. "What if they want me to leave? What if they don't like me?" "They already love you," Richard said gently. "They never stopped." Ben didn't respond. But that night he didn't sleep. The next day, Richard flew with Ben to a small town outside Denver. The Monroes lived in a modest brick house on a quiet street. When the car pulled up, a woman came out first, her hands shaking, tears falling before she reached the sidewalk. The man followed, slower, as if afraid the dream would vanish. Ben stepped out of the car. No one spoke. Then the woman whispered, "Ethan?" Ben stared at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. She ran to him, collapsing in his arms, sobbing. The man joined a moment later, pulling them all into a huddle. Richard watched from a few feet away. It was the most beautiful and painful thing he had ever seen. After a long time, Ben turned around and looked at Richard. "I still get to come home with you, right?" Richard's voice cracked. "Always." Later, over cocoa and photo albums, Ben sat between his birth parents, listening to stories about his first 5 days on Earth, stories he never knew he was missing. But when it came time to leave, he stood up, hugged them tightly, and said, "I'll come back to visit, I promise. But my family is waiting for me." They didn't argue. They just nodded through their tears. Because now Ben wasn't lost. He was found twice. 6 months passed. The world had moved on to newer headlines, fresh scandals, and brighter screens. But inside a large, sun-drenched home just outside Chicago, a small family bloomed quietly like spring after a brutal winter. Ben was no longer the skinny, scared boy who clutched silence like armor. Now he smiled more than he spoke. He walked with his shoulders back. He told bedtime stories to Hope and Sky with voices and funny accents, and pretended not to hear when Max climbed into his bed at 2 a.m. His adoption was finalized on a warm Tuesday morning. The courtroom was quiet. No cameras. Just a judge with kind eyes and a shaking voice as she read the final ruling. "Ben Monroe is hereby and forever adopted into the Hayes family." Ben held Richard's hand the entire time. Hope clapped when the papers were stamped. Sky shouted, "We're family now!" And Max tried to eat the judge's gavel. Afterward, Richard knelt in front of Ben and handed him a small velvet box. Ben opened it slowly. Inside was a custom necklace, a silver pendant engraved with 2 names, Ethan Monroe on one side, Ben Hayes on the other. 2 names, 2 lives. "One boy, you never have to choose who you are," Richard said. "You're all of it." Ben hugged him tightly, and Richard felt something unlock in his chest, something that had been buried for years. Not fear, not grief. It was peace, and it was whole. Summer came. The foundation expanded to 6 cities. A documentary aired about the lost children of West Avenue. Carla Jennings was sentenced to 35 years without parole. Several new laws were passed in her wake. Ben's Law, they called it, a reform in background checks for unregistered shelters. But the family didn't talk about all that. They spent their time living. They danced barefoot in the kitchen. They built pillow forts in the living room. They celebrated every first with cake. Hope's first word, up. Max's first step. Sky's first sentence. No nap, Ben. On Ben's 14th birthday, Richard surprised him with a room of his own design. Painted walls of galaxies and stars, a telescope by the window, and a quote painted above his bed. For the boy who looked up and never stopped believing. That night, after the babies were asleep and the party balloons had sagged, Ben sat on the porch beside Richard. The sky was wide and full of stars. "They still write about you sometimes," Ben said. "The billionaire who found a boy in the park." Richard nodded. "Let them." "But they don't know the truth," Ben said. "What truth?" "That I found you too." Richard smiled, eyes misting. "Yeah, I guess we found each other." Ben leaned his head on Richard's shoulder, and they sat in silence for a long time. No headlines, no courtrooms, no sirens, just two people watching the sky. One who had everything, but never knew love, and one who had nothing, but never stopped giving it. And together they built a home, not with bricks, but with heart.